Hey guys!
Welcome to the Socratic Shelf. Today we're covering our recent book haul.
We went to a couple different stores and definitely spent more than we should have.
This is a mix of both used and new books. I'd like to think we got a good mix of them in our almost 30 books we bought this weekend.
These are books that are going to leave you with a lasting impression, whether that's morals or intelligence or simply a good story. You will leave this book haul with the knowledge of a few books that could change your mind for the better.
Now let's get to it. Alright, to start we have To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. It is definitely a used book.
What? That looks so good.
It looks great.
So To Kill a Mockingbird is a Southern Gothic novel. It is also considered a historical fiction. A quick one-line description of it would be, a young white girl in the segregated South has a coming-of-age story while she witnesses her father, a lawyer, defend an innocent black man in court. So I've read this before. It was a very long time ago. So I wanted to buy it to reread it because it is considered one of the greatest novels of all time. It is highly regarded in our American culture.
And we did look up the Goodreads score. It is a 4.26 for this.
Which is very high for those of you who do not use Goodreads.
Yeah.
All
On
right.
to the next one.
On to the next.
All right, next we have The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. And it is another used book. It even has some nice annotations inside.
We love annotations. Please give us more annotations. Many would consider The Great Gatsby to be a historical novel, but it actually falls into the genre of realism and modernism, something that was seen during the Renaissance of the 1920s.
This book comes from the perspective of Nick at the height of the 1920s. He is often talking about a glamorous millionaire by the name of Gatsby who's attempting to get his lost love, Daisy.
Okay, and then the Goodreads score for this one is 3.93.
All right, next we have The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. It is another book, or used book. We got a lot of those.
So the genre for The Picture of Dorian Gray is a gothic horror. So a quick description of this book would be, the ever-beautiful Dorian Gray stays young while he watches his beautiful portrait of himself age horribly, driving him to madness.
And the Goodreads score on this is a 4.13. Next, we have Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. It is another used book, and it is historical fiction.
This is one of my favorites. I read it for a upper level English class during my college years, and the prose is quite beautiful. So a quick description of this would be, Janie lives as well as she can as a light-skinned black woman in the early 1900s South. She goes through a couple of husbands and makes it through what many could not. So if you were to get only a couple off of this list, which I know this is a large list, I would highly recommend getting this one.
And the Goodreads score is 3.99.
I think it deserves better.
All right, next we have the iconic The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. As you can see, this one's already began to be read. I think it was one that she got too quickly. We got this one new from Barnes & Noble, but it's still great all the same.
Support your local bookstores if you can. We just could not find this one in our local bookstores.
Kind of crazy.
I know. I think it's because it's so in demand right now.
Yeah, I saw it since like the book bannings that there's like a 3,000% increase in sales of this book or something like that.
Yeah, and for good reason.
Yeah. And this is obviously a dystopian fiction.
So in this dystopian novel, women in the United States have their rights stripped away, and it's basically from the point of view of one of the handmaids, which are kept by wealthy families to help reproduction. Margaret Atwood uses words that you would never think to use, and it makes for such beautiful, almost poetry with how she describes things. Like, she'll describe an object in a room and then she'll go back and describe it again in a different way. And I'm rereading it right now and it is so good.
And the part that I read, like, it's just, she does a beautiful job at creating a picture in your mind. Like, it's just perfect.
I know it's one after another, but if you were to get one, I would highly recommend you get this one as well.
And to match its reputation, it has a Goodreads score of 4.14. All right, the next one is The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins, obviously a part of the Hunger Games series, and we are intending on doing a Hunger Games video here soon, so
Yes,
that's why we
stay
grabbed it.
tuned.
And we bought, this is another one we bought new, obviously. I doubt you can even get these at resale by now. But
Yeah, it's only been a few years for, yeah.
obviously, dystopian fiction again. I think we're starting to see a theme on what we like here.
Dystopian fiction allows you to recognize the patterns that create a dystopia so that you can avoid it in your own world. So reading up on dystopian fiction can really help you with, say, like politics or any philosophy. So in this Hunger Games prequel, we follow President Snow before he even thought about being president, and his twisted rise to power, along with the 10th annual Hunger Games.
And this one is scored at 3.98. All right, cool. Next, we have Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. It is another used one, and yet another dystopian fiction.
I was waiting for that one. So I do have a warning with this book. I have read it before. I've read it multiple times. The first chapter, I hate to be that person, but it's not very entertaining. But just get through the first chapter, and it is a whirlwind after that. It is so good. It is one of my favorite books. I fully recommend that you get this. In this book, a man on the outside of the society he finds, which is based on uniformity and pleasure, he finds that maybe meaning isn't found in one's pleasure, but in the struggles one has.
And this has a score of 3.99. And we have another classic, Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut. We got this one new, and the genre is science fiction, dark comedy.
Yeah, it's definitely a dark comedy because of the way Vonnegut writes, which I have read this before. I read it in one of my lower level English classes. And it's science fiction because aliens are involved.
Or are they?
They definitely are. It's up for interpretation. I will take my old English professor's position and say that they totally are real. So this book is about an ex-soldier from World War II who becomes unstuck in time. And basically he gets abducted by aliens. He can visit different points in his past and his future. And the timeline gets a little sticky. It's a confusing read. It's a good read. If you want to level up your intelligence, if you want to level up your reading levels, read this book. You will feel so smart after it.
And also, it's definitely shaped, like your perception is shaped based off of like how you go into thinking about it.
Mm-hmm. Actually, to build on top of that, whenever you are reading this, do not read it as a linear timescape. Whenever you are reading it and you see those three little stars, know that the time and place is changing and it is non-linear.
And this one is rated at 4.1. All right, and we have a little bit newer of a book than we have been going through. It is The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. We bought it new, and it is a fantasy fiction.
I have not read this book yet. It was recommended very highly to me by one of my closest friends who reads a lot. She described to me this book as covering this young woman from a lower caste in a mythological Asian country. She is accepted into a highly selective military academy where she surprises everybody, her instructors, her friends, her enemies, and we follow her along while she takes this magical quest.
And I hear it has a cool mix of like folklore, magic, a little bit of lore and stuff. And this one has a Goodreads score of 4.17. And next we have one that I know is someone's favorite in the room. It is The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. This was a new book that we bought, and it is a psychological fiction.
It is also considered like a fictional autobiography because Sylvia Plath basically put, I believe it's Esther, in for herself. In this book, we follow Esther, who is a stand-in for Sylvia Plath, and we deal with mental illness, we deal with the expectations thrust upon her, and thrust upon most early 20-something-year-olds. She's trying to find her way in the world, and she doesn't know what to do. She has so many options, and yet it feels like she has no options at all. You can tell that Sylvia Plath is a poet first before she was a novelist, and It is magnificent. I love it. It is beautiful. I would highly recommend for anybody who is getting into poetry or like doesn't know how to transition into poetry to read this book first, because the prose she uses, you can tell that she's a poet.
Well, is that another recommendation I'm hearing?
Yeah, I would highly recommend getting this book, especially if you're a young 20-something-year-old or somebody who's going off to university or somebody who's just starting their way in the world. She sets out the bleakness, but also the opportunities that you could have.
And to match that raving review, it has a 4.06 on Goodreads. All right, and next we have The Color Purple by Alice Walker. It is another used book. This genre is identified as epistolary novel, whatever that means.
So to give a little explanation on that, epistolary simply means made up by letters. The Color Purple is a collection of letters written by Shelley, who is a Black woman in the South, and it details her struggles and her self-discovery as she makes it through what I believe is Georgia in the 1900s, right? Okay.
Mm-hmm. And this one is scored at 4.27. For the next one, we have Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. It is an old one. This one is used, and Frankenstein is a science fiction, right?
Yes, and a horror.
Mm-hmm.
So an arrogant scientist sets out to do the impossible, create life, but not just any life. He's trying to create a man. So he does it. It doesn't turn out good, spoiler, and it really just drives home the morality of if we can do something, should we?
And this one is scored at 3.88. We have what I believe is our highest rated one on the list. It is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. This is another used book, as you can see by our sticker. It is a literary fiction. And romance, you could say.
Yeah, it's definitely a romance, but it's so much more than just a romance. Comment if you are pro BBC teleseries over the 2004 movie. But if you don't know anything about this book whatsoever and have never heard of Jane Austen, it is a romance, but it's a little more complex than that. It is about Elizabeth Bennet as she tries to navigate Mr. Darcy and the family complications it brings with her social class and her financial status.
And like I said, this one is well rated. On Goodreads, it is a 4.29. Right. Next we have Sula by Toni Morrison, another used one, and it is another literary fiction, right?
Yes. Toni Morrison is fantastic. She portrays relationships and personalities as they are, rather than just some stereotypes. Sula covers two young girls in a mostly Black town that are childhood friends, but then their relationship becomes extremely complicated once one of them leaves and comes back.
And this one is rated at 4.04. And next we have an impulse buy of ours. It is called Never Whistle at Night by Shane Hawke.
It's actually not by Shane Hawke, though. It's I believe it's edited by Shane Hawke and Theodore Van Elst Jr. Yeah. So this is actually a anthology. It's a collection of, I believe, short stories about Indigenous and Native American folklore.
And whenever we looked this one up on Goodreads, it is rated at 3.91. And next we have another F. Scott Fitzgerald. This one is Tender is the Night. Another used book, and another fictional autobiography.
So this one I hold dearly to my heart. I would not say that you have to go buy this book. It is not the most amazing book ever. The prose, though, is quite lovely. You can tell that Fitzgerald put his all into this. It is a fictional autobiography. He basically has a stand-in in this book who is a psychiatrist, though Fitzgerald was only an author. But in this book, the psychiatrist has married his patient, and it kind of goes through some time skips, and we basically just find out maybe it's not a good idea for a doctor to marry his 16-year-old patient. It really covers how women are viewed through the eyes of men. And it can be really eye-opening to some women and even some men who do not view women that way.
And if I remember right, this is one that you wrote a paper on, right?
Yes, I actually wrote my final English class in college. I wrote my final paper on this, and it was a comparative analysis between this and the Yellow Wallpaper.
And this one has a little bit lower of a Goodreads score at 3.78. Ooh, we have a new one here. The Odyssey by Homer. It's used. The genre's epic.
So an epic is a type of poem, and the Iliad and the Odyssey were some of the first of the Western epics. It's the classic epic, and it stars Odysseus, taking around 10 years after the Trojan War, and this tale is actually filled to the brim with the OG Greek myths.
And next we have I Am Malala by Malala Yousafzai. This was a used book that we got, and it is an autobiography, right?
Yes, it is. So this was written by a woman who grew up in Pakistan and was under Taliban rule for a while, and she actually stood up against them and peacefully protested, and she was targeted by them and was shot. She was attempted to be assassinated. She survived, and she wrote this. She is a standing beacon for women's education. But it seems truly inspirational whenever, at a time like this, when peaceful protest doesn't seem to be doing anything, it really does something. And I am such an advocate for it, and I believe that reading this book will give me a new insight into it.
And it has a score of 4.16. And next we have another Toni Morrison. This time it is The Bluest Eye. I think it is another one of our more used books that we got. And what is it, a tragedy realism?
Yeah, so I believe this takes place in the 1940s. It covers Pacola, a young black girl, and the premise of the story is pretty basic. She wants to have blue eyes. She believes that her life will be better if she has blue eyes. And she believes this because she's told this.
Well, this one has a Goodreads score of 4.12. And next we have another iconic one, The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. That is another used one, and it is fantasy fiction.
It covers Bilbo Baggins, which is the uncle of Frodo, as he joins a group of dwarves, and they go and try and take back the dwarves' homeland from a dragon.
And this is one we didn't go to the store expecting we'd have, but we thought it was a pretty cool addition.
Yeah, this was definitely an impulse buy, but we didn't have it, and it's kind of like you kind of have to have that if you're a reader.
Right.
So while it's lower on my list, I will be reading that.
We'll get there one day.
Yeah.
And even though this isn't going to be read immediately, it is sharing the highest score on our list of books that we got with a 4.29, tied with Pride and Prejudice. Very similar books.
Oh, yes.
Ooh, one of our prettier books. It is A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. A used one, but a really pretty one. And this is obviously historical fiction about Christmas.
So for those of you who have not seen any of the Disney adaptations of this, there are so many for some reason. This is about a miserly man named Ebenezer Scrooge who is visited by 3 ghosts on Christmas Eve, and they basically scare him so badly that he decides to be kind again.
And the Goodreads score is 4.09. Another Jane Austen. This time, it's Emma. Another used book, and what would you call it? A romance comedy?
Yeah, it's definitely more of a comedy than Pride and Prejudice. So for those of you who have not seen the movie, which is the only way that I know the story, because I have not read it yet, it is about the ever so lovely Emma, who, while she thinks that she's doing the right thing, she is often misguided with her matchmaking, especially with her own.
And this one is rated at 4.05. And next, we have The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. It is another used book, and it is kind of like a fantasy fiction philosophy kind of book. So this book follows a young shepherd named Santiago, and he takes a journey to be able to find some treasure of some sort, and it's more about his journey of self-actualization.
And then the Goodreads score is 3.92.
And next we have The Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave by Frederick Douglass. It is a used book, and it is an autobiography.
I had heard about this book before. I actually have not read it yet. I fully intend on reading it. It's not just going to sit on my shelf. So this book recounts the life of Frederick Douglass. It begins with his awful experiences as a slave, then his brutal escape, and then his eventual work as a social reformer against slavery.
This one is rated at 4.12, one of our more significant impulse buys. It is haiku, and it is translated by Hart Larrabee. And obviously, we have a fan of poetry here, so we had to get haiku, right?
Yes, I love haikus. It's basically just a collection of what was originally Japanese haikus, translated by that guy, and they're quite lovely.
And this one is rated on Goodreads score as a 4.32. I'm not really counting that as the highest because it only had a couple.
Yeah, how many was it?
It was like 15 or 30 or something,
Yeah.
so. But we had to do it to keep consistent. This is a pretty cool one that we totally bought on a whim. It is Irish Fairy and Folk Tales by W.B. Yeats. This one was used, and like I said earlier, we kind of like folklore and stuff like that.
So a lot of our current, I would say, mythology comes from Irish folklore whenever we're talking about like fairies, fairy kingdoms. I won't say the word. Okay, I'll say the word. Court of Thorns and Roses comes from, a lot of it comes from Irish folklore. And so that type of stuff is interesting, especially the source material.
But it actually had a surprising amount of reviews on it on Goodreads.
Really? How many?
I would have to take a look. I don't remember.
Okay.
But I think it was in the matter of thousands. But even with all those reviews, it rated in at 4.04. So didn't look at that beforehand, but hopefully that means it'll be good. We spent our money well. And while we're talking about fairies, we have The Fairy Queen by Edmund Spenser. This is another used book, and it is another epic that we picked up.
Edmund Spenser, he is the origin of Spenserian, if you've ever heard that term in poetry or literature. So this is his iconic piece. It was dedicated to his queen at the time. I believe it was Elizabeth I. And it was basically a love letter of poetry to his queen about his love for the church at the time, which was the Anglican Church.
And this is one you did in college, right?
Yeah, so during one of my upper level courses, I had to read early and middle English. It was painful. It really was painful. It was one of those things where you'd read it and you'd be like, this isn't even the same language that I speak. And then you'd have to spark notes it and be like, what just happened? It was a hard read, but I would recommend it to anybody who wants to get serious about the history of poetry.
And this one, I'm assuming because it's not the easiest read in the world, is a 3.58.
That's the lowest one on our list, right?
It is.
Which makes sense. People don't like hard reads. Well, that was our last book. I know. It wasn't enough. You need more from us. Don't worry. We will be coming out with more videos soon.
There will probably be another weekend that we spend too much money on books.
Definitely go for used books when you can. They're cheaper, and you minimize the waste that you would be having if you bought everything new. Also, support your local bookstores. That's very important. Supporting small businesses is very important. So I hope that we inspired you to be smarter with the books you buy, whether that's which books you buy or how you buy them, used or not.
And I really hope you enjoyed today. If we inspired you to buy any specific books, please share down below in the comments. If you did like it, please hit us with a like. And if you want to see more content like this, please subscribe. And in the next year or so, we do plan on doing some level of content on a good amount of those books. So please, if you do have any interest in that, do follow along.
Yeah, and if there's any summaries you want from him, those take a lot of effort from us, so go ahead and let us know which ones you'd actually want to watch. Well, that's it for today.
Thanks, bye.
Bye.